So when I think of you, I think of someone who is a really good representation of what a cannabis patient looks like. Because like even just looking at you now, like you're always so bright-eyed, so like,
Mm.
just very present in the moment, vibrant, well-spoken. And yeah, so was it always like that when you were first becoming a patient? Did you have to experiment a lot to find something that allowed you to be so present for your kids, for your work?
Yeah, thank you. I think I am, definitely a good representation because I think there are so many different types of people that are utilizing cannabis. And there's definitely a specific segment and many specific segments of the population that are scared to come forward. And that was one of my biggest motivators, like with Marijuana Mommy specifically, and focusing
Mhm.
on the fact that I was a mom, to create that safe space for, other parents, because it is scary as a parent to speak up publicly about your use, especially as a single
Yeah.
parent. Like, I'm a single mom, and that's scary because, in a lot of places, custody is still an issue. They can still take away your children. Now, fortunately, here in New Jersey, we have a lot more protection than other areas.
Yeah.
Um, and that was really like my motivation. Like, if I can speak up, then I should speak up. Then I have an obligation to speak up.
Absolutely. What was it like coming out to other mothers of your children in the very beginning? That must have been kind of scary.
It was very scary in the beginning. It was hard. It was nerve-wracking, but it really felt like something that, again, it was an obligation. Like, I had to. And within my circle, and even among my family, and with people who knew me, they saw the impact directly, because before I became a cannabis patient, I was on so many pharmaceuticals. Like, I was taking opiates and Valium both around the clock, so every 4 to
Wow.
6 hours, and a whole bunch of other stuff like Lyrica, which is, really significant heavy duty medications that have tons of negative side effects. So I was
Yeah.
barely existing. I
Wow.
was miserable and sick all the time. And cannabis really dramatically changed that. It didn't cure me. I always say that all the time.
Yeah.
I still have limitations. I still have pain. I still have,
Yeah.
so many frustrating issues. But finally, I have a medication that I can use to manage it without all of those horrific side effects. And the people around me saw that, and
Yeah.
that was really impactful for them too. In the beginning, a lot of people were like, "Oh boy, she's crazy. She's
Ah!
lost it. We're unfollowing
And
her. No more IG." They're like, "She's out of her mind." But
what year
as
what year did you first become a patient? So
2015,
so that's pretty recent though. Like the world was already a bit enlightened, because we've had the program that in
well, there
Jersey
was,
since 2009. So
yeah, but there was still only, like, when I started, like 15,000, 20,000 patients. Like, it was still
really?
crazy. Yeah, and when you look at the population, I mean, even right now, like, we have 70,000 patients out of 9 million
Oh, I know.
people. It's
I
like
know.
it's tiny. So yeah, I mean, there was still a lot of, I honestly, when I became a patient, I had no idea about the medical marijuana program. Never in
Uh,
a million years did I think I would qualify. And I'm a nurse. I'm a registered
yeah.
nurse. And I was a hospice nurse. So I was really an expert at managing people's pain. And that was one of the most frustrating aspects for me about my injury and my issues, because for years I took care of other people and I helped them, and I was good at creating comfort and relieving pain. And then when it came to my own pain, I knew about what medications I needed and what should work and what treatments, but
Yeah.
nothing helped and nothing worked, and it was so frustrating. But I believed, like, when somebody told me about cannabis, I'm like, if that really helps, like,
Ah,
then I would know about it. It is the Dunning-Kruger effect. You
yes.
hear
You know
that
what?
so often.
There's so much I want to talk to you about, like all these points you're hitting on, but just why don't, because I know your story, but why don't we back up for people who don't and just, talk about, you just said you were a registered nurse, but you had this accident and then, just go into that.
Yeah, so I am a registered nurse, and I was a hospice nurse, and I loved it. I was really passionate about it. It was an incredible, incredible vocation. And I was injured at work in just a bizarre freak accident. And I suffered multiple herniated discs in my neck and a whole bunch of nerve damage throughout the back of my head and my right arm. And, like everybody out there who gets injured at work, I started, workman's comp and pursuing wellness. And I thought for sure, I'm going to find that doctor who fixes me. It's just a matter of time. I'm going to try another medication. Something's going to work.
Yeah.
And
Because you were pretty young too, right?
Yes. Yeah. It was 2014 that I was injured. So,
yeah. So you would think like, oh, I'm going to bounce back. I'm still,
and I was fit. I was marathon training at the time and
wow.
doing advanced yoga every day. And I was like, of course I'm going to get better. It's just, I mean, it was shocking. And I never did, and I went through all of the different treatments that they recommend and tried all the prescriptions. And eventually I had a multi-level spinal fusion, and that made me worse.
So I know you can't drive. I remember we were in the car one day and you were like, this is like all I could do. Is that from the fusion?
That's from the fusion.
Wow.
Yeah. So before the actual surgery, I was still driving and, tons and tons of pain, tons of issues in my arm as well. But I did have a lot more mobility, and that was, that sucked. Yeah, that sucked a lot. That's one of the most frustrating things, I think. One of the most frustrating ways it's affected my life. But, I'm fortunate in so many ways. I can do everything else. I also can't run. I haven't been able to run ever since.
How come?
I can
compression
walk
on your spine?
It's the impact.
Wow.
And it creates, I have so much nerve damage in here, and nerve damage from the surgery as well. I actually have nerve damage in my throat. So I have a lot of swallowing issues as well. And that's from the actual surgery when they go in. So it's frustrating. And I always think back, like, what if I had had cannabis before the surgery? Like, would I have had that surgery?
Wow. And how long did you miss it by? Like starting to use cannabis versus having
a year.
A year. That's frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I've worked in cannabis for 11 years now. So,
amazing.
Yeah, amazing is a strong word. We age in dog years in cannabis, but, yeah. But yeah, so when I was in 2009, the law passed. It was probably 2010. Whenever the first dispensary opened, I have a type of epilepsy where I haven't had a seizure in 15 years. But so it's great. It's controlled. But so I approached my neurologist and said, hey, I'd like to try this instead of, the tons of different, since I was born with this since I'm a child. And when I was a kid, I used to have to get blood work for liver function and all that. And, if I was looking to get pregnant, have birth defects, I was like, I'd really like to get off the pharmaceuticals. And the doctor said to me, he's like, absolutely not. Like, I could lose my license. People are going to, lose their licenses over this. Like, he was like hysterical. And I thought I had like such a cool neurologist. So that was a dead end. But I've gotten very close with the legislation since then. And actually what it was is, even for epilepsy, all traditional pharmaceuticals had to fail before they would let you try. It was the last line of defense. And I said, like, if I had a child, like especially CBD would be my first line of defense. Like, it's so gentle. Absolutely. Our bodies have an endocannabinoid system. Like, we are designed to consume this, So the legislation has really improved a lot for patients. I know you talked about custody. That was something even in last year's bill that I remember adding something to add further protections. But were the protections there when you were going through your divorce?
Well, I went through divorce a long time ago. It was over a decade ago. So it was way before I was a patient.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but, there were some protections in there. There were, I think, the specifics that needed to be in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was something, other states don't have nothing in some other areas. It's terrible. It's distressing.
Yeah, no, it really is. So when did, go ahead.
I wanted to point out, like, I think it was the same thing when I became a patient too. I qualified under skeletal muscle spasticity, untreatable by conventional methods. So the same thing, you had to try everything, which is just ridiculous. And for many conditions, cannabis should be a front line. It's ludicrous that we are giving these patients these addictive, detrimental pharmaceuticals when there might be a more natural, safer option.
Yeah, and we know the long-term effects of a lot of those pharmaceuticals, you know. My mother's had you know, Parkinson's symptoms from a side effect from one of her medications. She was on
Oh
like
yeah.
20 years, you know. And in some ways now those side effects are irreversible where, you know, it's really frustrating. She was in the hospital one time and they were pumping her full of opiates, you know. She was in extreme pain for weeks and I was starting to then worry about addiction and this and that. And as they were taking her off, it occurred to me because the way I'm sure you know, with medical coding, we don't have a way to code for cannabis if you go into the hospital. They just put you down as a substance user. So I was like, my fight isn't really done until you could be in the ER and still be prescribed cannabis, which we're still pretty far away from.
Far, far, far from.
Yeah. So when did it turn for you from, okay, this is something that helps me to this is what I want to do with my life and make a business out of it?
That was gradual too. So let's see. I was the business part. I guess it kind of all merged. So all right, let's see. I was already writing, so I write a lot. I've written for like you know, my pieces have been all over like Cosmopolitan and Good Housekeeping and a lot of different places.
Yeah.
And I was writing, you know, about a lot of different things, and it just kind of gradually. And I was blogging about health and family health. So then when I became a patient, I'm like, I have to share my story. Like it was an obligation, and I knew like I had to, you know. And that's when I started slowly just, you know, writing more about cannabis. And then just eventually it just transitioned full time because there was so much that needed to be taught, and it was such an area that was in need of,
Yeah.
you know, health guidance and in need of somebody who had a medical background who could, you know, help guide new patients who are scared. And that's really
Yeah.
the whole premise behind Marijuana Mommy. It's about teaching new patients how and why to use cannabis, and it's basically, you know, all of the basics. We talk a lot about, you know, the different ways that cannabis helps, but also like practical things like recipes and how to make canna butter and, you know, a whole bunch of different things.
That's awesome. So I was going to say, you're such a good writer. I know you have a local, I don't know if it's called a column anymore, but you with NJ.com, I always see you up
Oh,
there.
it was with NJ Cannabis Insider, and then
Yes.
yes, and then it was published in NJ.com, and then in the Star Ledger. That was awesome. Yeah,
Yeah, that's really
yeah.
awesome. But so you've been writing for a really long time, even pre-cannabis. So did you have like a following as like a blogger back?
Yeah, I had followings and communities, a small following, and, you know, a lot of different communities that I was a, you know, a big part of. So yeah, most of them just very naturally and easily transitioned. And even like now, it, you know, I find I don't generally get a bad reception usually. Like when I start talking about it, people are very interested, and even among the medical community. Like that's a question somebody asked me recently. Like, how do your colleagues react? They're so positive. Like you get, you know, some people who they'll always until they experience it themselves, or they have a loved one who's close to them that they see it firsthand, they will always believe the prohibition that's been brainwashed into us for over 80 years.
For
But
sure.
there were, you know, for the most part, people were very, very open. And as they start seeing, you know, it in the media more, and they start seeing more research being done, you know, and they start meeting more patients, they want to know more, like, how do I help these patients, what
Yeah.
interactions are there, and there could potentially be many interactions. So
Yeah.
it's been very, very positive in that manner. Like most people are at the point where they're really ready to learn more.
Yeah, you told me something I had not heard before. The hyperemesis, is it? Hyperemesis?
Hyperemesis, yes,
Yeah.
cannabis hyperemesis syndrome.
Yeah, tell people about that because I thought that was super interesting.
It's super rare.
Yeah.
It's very, very rare, but it's a very, very dangerous potential complication of cannabis use. And it's something that we see generally in people who have been using for years and who are consuming high doses.
Hmm.
And it's what they develop this condition where it's cyclic vomiting, and they just start
Crazy.
vomiting. And that's hyperemesis. That's the emesis. And it's just constant. And they can't, all the tests, they can't figure out what's working. Antiemetics or nausea medications don't work, like traditional nausea medications, generally for
Yeah.
patients who have CHS. And it can be potentially deadly. And it's very easy to stop. but hard at the same time. The only way to treat it is for the patient to stop all cannabis use, including CBD. They can't have any. And
Wow.
some patients have even reported that even secondhand smoke has triggered vomiting episodes later, like after,
Wow.
but yeah, they have to avoid all cannabis use. And, if they don't, it can kill them. They can die from multi-system organ failure. Yes, people will become so dehydrated that they will die. And again, it's very, very, very rare.
Of
And,
course. Yeah.
we're seeing it more and more in the media. And my concern is always that sometimes it's overdiagnosed.
Mm.
So in some areas, a doctor will have heard of it and they'll be prejudgmental to a cannabis patient. And you walk in,
Yeah.
and if you say you've ever used cannabis, oh, you have CHS, and it's like you're not. It's a diagnosis that you can only obtain by exclusion. So anybody who suspects CHS, they should stop using cannabis right away the doctors should consider should continue with their treatment and do all of the procedures to rule out everything else. Like
So
everything else needs
what
to be
else could be presenting that looks like it?
gallbladder issues. There's
Okay.
anything that can cause nausea and vomiting, everything, it could
Wow.
be even something like a urinary tract infection can cause nausea and vomiting. So, usually people start finding it. Usually patients don't realize what they have until like after multiple hospitalizations, and they're like, what's
Wow.
going on? Like, why am I sick? And they're seeing experts and specialists. Then something is really up. Like if it's a first time episode and people are diagnosed, I'm a little more hesitant to believe
Yeah.
it.
So, you said there are a lot of interactions, and I know something we commonly say in cannabis is no one's ever died from it. There's no lethal amount, and I'm beginning to think that, well, what, like you just said, someone could die from that, and I've also heard there's cardiac problems that if you had an underlying condition. So, are we lying to people when we say no one's ever died from it?
You can say confidently nobody's ever died from a cannabis overdose. Nobody
Oh,
has.
oh,
Nobody's
for
ever
sure.
died from an overdose. Can cannabis kill people when we look at CHS? Well, I mean, it's not an allergy. I want to be
Mhm.
very specific that CHS is not an allergy, but let's compare it to allergies. Like, are peanuts dangerous? Do peanuts kill people?
Sure.
Because people have died from a bad reaction to the peanut,
Mhm.
so, it's a very dangerous, adverse, process that can be triggered by cannabis.
Yeah.
But realistically, stopping the cannabis would stop the disease process and people wouldn't die. So maybe it's denial. A lot of people
Yeah.
don't want to believe. That's like one of the challenges with CHS. People don't want to believe it's real,
Huh.
especially since we've seen it more in like long-term adamant cannabis patients who this is part of their life. Like Alice Moon, who's very, involved and popular in the industry, talks about it a lot. She suffered from CHS, and it's
Really? Hmm.
devastating when cannabis is such an integral part of your life, when, it's
Hmm.
woven into your communities and your social circles, and it's part of your career. Can you imagine not being able to consume and being surrounded by
No.
people? No, I couldn't either.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really, the way. I mean, as far as interactions, yes, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Grapefruit juice can interact with a lot of medications. Actually, very similar way. It's that same metabolic pathway. Do we
Hmm.
consider grapefruit juice deadly? Do we say people have died from grapefruit juice? Not necessarily.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Fair. I just, I obviously am very pro cannabis. But
I know.
but I don't want to ever just live with blinders and say
I
everything's
agree.
perfect, so that way if people come at you with, well, what about this? You say, okay, well, I have the knowledge and here's the counter argument to that. So
Absolutely. I always tell people, nobody's ever died of a cannabis overdose, but there are risks, like all substances,
yeah.
caffeine. There are risks,
Yeah.
so we have to just have education and teach people about those risks.
As a cannabis nurse, so in the beginning, I said you have this like bright-eyed, vibrant. Are you medicating throughout the day or?
Mhm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
So
all day, every day.
So has it been a challenge or a journey of selecting the strain that's right for you? And
It's been a huge challenge. I am very, very strain sensitive. So there are a lot of strains that cause anxiety for me,
mhm.
especially the more, energizing strains that we have out there. I have a very hard time, using those. So it has been challenging, especially in New Jersey. And
Yeah.
this, it's impossible. And it's irresponsible the way that our program has such poor access to cultivars. And and such poor consistent access. And that's one of the biggest challenges also as a nurse, helping other patients. Like, a patient will find a cultivar that works perfectly for them, and then they can't get it for 6 months or 8 months, and
Wow.
it's terrible. And they'll go back to the dispensary, they'll be like, oh well, I got something different. And it's like if you were going to a pharmacy to get your blood pressure medication and they're like, sorry, we don't have that, but here,
Yeah.
try some cholesterol medicine this month. See how that works out for you. It's absurd.
Exactly. It really, really is. And yeah, people, I realize like it's just the ignorance of the legislators because they don't know what they don't know, and it's just trying to educate them. There's still so much bias where they just view it as like, oh, you guys just want to smoke weed. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also the routes of administration are really frustrating. The limited access to cartridges and edibles and concentrates, like, we're pushing smoking, which is my least favorite method of consumption for anyone. I think, I just think that there's so many better ways out there, at least vaporization.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really what Jersey is positioning its patients to do. So, but yeah, so you're still a nurse and you do this full time now. So you was there a period where you were like, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life? And I know now you do patient consultations and things like that.
Yes.
So
Yeah. I mean, of course. Oh my gosh. Was there ever? Yes. It was, I think more so that started with my accident. And,
yeah.
when I realized, I'm never going to have my career. And that was probably about a year after my accident before I realized I wasn't going back. For a long time, I was like, I'm a nurse. I'm always going to have a job. Like,
Yeah.
that's why I became a nurse, job security, and that was devastating to realize, you spend all that time working towards it and it's a career that you love, and then not being able to go back. So I was writing. I think that's really what kept me and has always kept me afloat, my ability to write and ability to write for other people or write for publications. So that's really what saved me. Much more challenging to make an income as a writer than as a employed registered nurse. But so it was really also kind of like amazing to get to the point where I'm like, I can help patients, I can do consultations, and I created a course for patients, and now I can guide them through that, or I can teach. I do a lot of classes for and workshops. Well, I was doing a lot of classes and workshops before COVID happened, but
For sure.
for various healthcare facilities, different home healthcare nurse groups, or different groups of pharmacists. So yeah, it's been amazing.
Well,
I'm very fortunate.
in some ways you were very COVID ready because you have a very significant digital presence to begin with.
Yes, in some ways, but in other ways, it's not. Like, so I have a pipe shop too. I have Pretty Pipe Shop. Yes, prettypipeshop.com. And that's really been like a big part of my income as well, building that. And that has been devastated by the lockdowns. My total supply chain is completely shut down. I have no inventory. It has been absolutely 100% devastating. So it's ironic that, yes, I have this online business that I can do 100% online. It doesn't have to close. You can't get anything. And I think that's really a huge issue for so many companies right now who have, gotten overseas inventory. It's very, very challenging to get it right now.
Oh, I didn't realize you were actually doing like inventory pre-pipe shop. I thought it was like an affiliate or drop ship or something.
Yeah, there was a lot of drop shipping that I was using as well. But now I'm holding inventory. But the drop shipping is also totally affected, 100%.
Is it? Okay.
But one of my challenges with the Pretty Pipe Shop is it's super niche. So it's about affordable glass with a feminine edge, and finding that, domestically is very, very challenging. Finding a lot of functional glasses domestically is challenging, unless it's like hand blown, gorgeous pieces, but
for sure.
Different market.
And just the idea of this industry catering to women is a very new concept.
Yes,
it was immensely male dominated most of the time I was coming up. I mean, people used to come up to the booth and look through me. And if I had like a guy friend in back hanging out or helping out, they would just say, hey, can I talk to your boss? Like just automatically.
Still do that.
They still do that.
I still get that. If I go on a press pass, they'll be like, I have to talk to him because he's press. And I'm like, I'm press,
Yeah. Now, And especially with investing, oh my God, have I received
Mm,
discrimination? I actually want to start talking about that. Not on your time, but I have some
you
rants to go
should,
on.
yeah.
Yeah. So how have you found being a woman in the industry? Because you're on lists all the time of women doing great things.
Yeah, same. It's challenging. I think we're going to deal with sexism everywhere. I do think we have a lot more visible women, and I do think it is more of a like our industry, the cannabis industry, really makes effort to appeal to women at this point, and they're really making an effort to support females in the industry. So I think we're slightly better off,
Yeah.
but I think it's always that's always a challenge.
I think we're benefiting from because we're such a young industry coming up in an age where we have that
Definitely.
awareness as opposed to things that have been around for 100 years and their foundations were laid in a much different time.
Couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. That is
So,
the one thing the one advantage about prohibition, right?
right? But
Starting
so
on more equal footing a little bit.
you look for I gotta look for silver linings. I'm gonna throw myself off a bridge in Jersey soon. So
I know we're suffering a lot out here. We really
we
are.
really like our licensing process is such a nightmare. Were you involved in that? Were you trying to?
I mean, I was on some of the patient advocate boards, but nothing. Yeah, I wasn't
Yeah.
too involved in any of the process. So
Okay. So what's your thoughts on the black market? Because that under COVID is absolutely exploding. You've talked about lack of patient access and,
horrible.
horrible. So, do you ever, when you're, I mean, not legally, you wouldn't say to your patients, you should seek the black market, but there are times when that's people's best options.
Sure. That's a huge challenge that healthcare professionals face.
Yeah.
Um, if if your patient is dying from cancer and they literally can't get any medication from their dispensaries, and where they can get medication that would save their lives, it's this very, very difficult challenge between our ethical responsibilities as a healthcare provider and the vows that we take, and this legal obstacle to overcome. So it's a huge, huge challenge that a lot of healthcare providers face. And as far as the illicit market, thank God for the illicit market. Thank God, especially in
Seriously.
this, because patients do not have access. And I've had patients that have come off of all of their pharmaceuticals and they've become dependent on cannabis. That's how it works. If you're dependent on pharmaceuticals, of course you're going to be, they need the cannabis to
Yeah.
treat their conditions. And then suddenly sorry, you can't get an
Yeah.
appointment. Sorry, there's,
Yeah.
the places are closed. We had an outbreak, and that is devastating, because what do they do at that point? It's
Yeah.
not that easy to go back on pharmaceuticals, especially, for many patients, especially like for many patients, if they came off of opiates, like to go on
Yeah.
opiates now is very, very challenging. So that has been a huge issue. And so many patients, recently, because of the lockdowns here in New Jersey, have turned to the illicit market. They've had no choice.
Yeah.
It's been the only way that they could get medication. And it's heart-wrenching and awful.
Yeah, I know so many people who are thriving on the black market right now. And it's almost like I can't blame them because, like you said, thank God for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if you have a child who has epilepsy or end of
Yes.
life type of treatment,
Yes.
and these people are in pain or cancer, like you have people suffering. And also, when you say dependence, that's not to be confused with addiction
Totally
because,
different. Yeah.
yeah, we're not talking about people like,
Right.
cracked out and being like,
No, no,
I can't
no.
get it's literally they're dependent on
Yes.
this because it improves their quality of life.
Yeah, it's like a patient who's on blood pressure medication is dependent on that
Yes,
medication. You can't suddenly take it
exactly.
away. A person on antidepressants, they're dependent on that. You can't just rip it away. You need to
Yeah.
either change it or titrate it down or up. Same with cannabis, same thing.
And that dependence is why it's been deemed essential, which is
Exactly.
amazing. But it just seems like it's great that we got that because in a lot of ways
Thank God. Oh my God. Can you imagine if it wasn't?
first, then the black market would just own the state. And I don't know. I think that would position us in a way that like a California is where we would never come back from it because it would be such a
Mm,
time where we were just had such a thriving gray market at some point.
right?
But but I feel like our state is almost doing this to that anyway. Because, with the lack of say edibles or things like that, you're really
would be.
forcing people into the black market. And we've had so many years now of limited licenses and nothing on the horizon to improve our situations. I feel like Jersey is going to be one of those places where it doesn't go away for a really long time.
Yeah, and not to mention our exorbitant prices, because the costs in New Jersey
Yeah.
are disgusting and obscene. Like, to get a 3 ounces is like $1,500 in some dispensaries.
Yeah.
$1,500 a month. That's
Insane.
bonkers. And yeah, I think I think it's a huge issue, and that does drive a lot of people to purchase illegally. At the same time, I have a lot of reservations. Like, it depends, do I know where it's coming from? Like, if I
Yeah.
know a grower and I know what's going into it, then maybe I'd be more comfortable. I'm always concerned about, is there pesticides in it? Is there
Yep.
mold in it? Like, is it going to make me sicker?
Yes.
So, and that's a challenge, especially with some of our more vulnerable patients, like our patients who are on chemotherapy and stuff like that. Molds, in an illegal grow can kill them, if
Yeah.
that's not being checked and watched. So, it's choosing between, the lesser of two evils, which
Yeah.
it's very hard situation. And you mentioned like epilepsy, like pediatrics for parents who
Yeah.
are looking for medication for their kids. Oh my gosh, it's a horrible, horrible ethical and emotional dilemma to place on them. Like, and you're right, New Jersey has a long way to go. And like when I became a patient, 5 years ago, I was like, oh, it's going to come down. The prices are going to come down. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Access
No.
is going to get better. I have less
No.
access to my cultivars now than I did when I first became a patient, because the program has grown so much. Like, we've grown in a matter of a few years from 35,000 to over 70,000 patients,
Yeah.
but our supply has not grown equally. It's very sad.
There was an episode I recorded about 6 months ago, and I just launched last month. So it was like we did this one, and then a bunch of stuff happened. And I was talking to the person. I was like, "Hey, your episode's up," and he's like, "Oh, isn't it a bit dated?" And I was like, "You know what? Sadly, no. Like, we have all the same problems, all the same challenges. In 6 months, we've essentially accomplished nothing in
That's so
New
funny.
Jersey." And it really is. It's just like all of us are banging our head against the wall every day, and we're giving patients these terrible choices, like you just said. I talked to someone who's like, because now the lines at our dispensary, someone sent me a picture of cars lining down the road to it. For it's yeah, and my one friend was like, I'm just gonna go and sell them for half the price and twice the quality, and just go down and sell black market to all.
Smart, and make a fortune.
Yeah, right. I was like, it's not a
Do you want to
terrible
wait in
idea.
line, or do you want to buy something better for less money?
Exactly. I mean, it really is the situation, and it's price gouging. To there, I've heard now they can produce cannabis in Canada for a nickel a gram. Yeah, like commercial production.
Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too. Like Jersey, we're gonna have a short lifespan here if we keep this up, because eventually this is gonna be federally legal, and the cheaper states where, especially outdoor and sunshine's free, and then countries like and
Absolutely.
these dispensaries are just taking advantage right now because they can.
They really, really are. I agree. They can, because
Yeah.
what other options do you have? And another issue we have here is the whole delivery situation.
Yes. Yes.
It's I have patients who have gone to the illicit market because they are literally scared to death to go into a dispensary. And we've had outbreaks in dispensaries. We've had
Yeah.
dispensary employees testing positive, and it's a shame, because the whole, that contact is not only dangerous for our very, very vulnerable, patients, but
Yeah.
our essential employees, like our dispensary staff, shouldn't be put in that constant contact situation either. It's ludicrous.
Yeah.
Harmony's been doing a good job with their curbside. They've been
Have
doing
they?
really good with limiting contact. Yeah. And it's fast and quick, but it's hard to get an appointment. It's very difficult to get an
Yeah.
appointment.
Yeah. I've had people reaching out to me like, "Hey, can you get me in here? Can you?" I was like,
Pull.
Sorry.
Can't get
Yeah.
myself in.
Yeah. Now it's pretty crazy. And so, like, where do you see the future going, like in a Jersey level and a federal level?
Oh, I don't know. I had really high hopes, that we'd be all legal now and things would be different. Our
Yeah.
100 days is gone.
Oh my
So
God. One.
I have really low expectations for New Jersey, I'm sad to say. Like, I think our ballot, we have it on the ballot
Yep,
in November. I think it'll pass, but I think it's going to be years before we see regulations
for
that
sure.
actually put it into effect. Because look what happens. We have the Jay Koenig bill that passed that's
Yeah.
supposed to open up, telehealth permissions and open up delivery. And they just haven't bothered. And it's been a long time. The legislation is there. The law is there. I'm not sure what's
It,
creating the
we
bottleneck.
I worked a lot on that bill. I'm
I
this
know.
probably the single largest like civilian contributor to it. And there was so much thought and care that went into things like that, like delivery. And now even when you see something like this that puts a spotlight on how much we need it. I had during when COVID started a liquor store delivery menu the next day. I was just like, I started
Crazy.
getting hit up by liquor stores. And I was just like, this is like, okay, sure, there are alcoholics who are dependent on alcohol.
Sure. Yeah. It needs to be essential. Yeah, I get it.
But
But
but let's be realistic. Most of these people getting these menus are not patients. They are
none of them are patients.
yeah. So I mean the fact not a Chardonnay patient, but
That's my medicine.
yeah. I mean, it's fine. You can self-medicate, but that's not why I got the menu. So yeah, it's really
And
frustrating
now
that
mixed drinks. Now you can order a
yes,
margarita and
yeah,
have it delivered.
literally.
Mhm.
Literally, we are just waiving regulations and putting all these things through. And it's like we can't get a bag of cannabis to a person who's dying
Literally.
in months now, and the
It's
DOH
bonkers.
just keeps and like I respect that they are having a terrible time right now with this.
Obviously, they're a little busy, but yeah, but it
Like,
feels like we've been abandoned, right? Like I feel
yeah,
abandoned, and I know that so many people, so many cannabis patients also feel abandoned because it's like the Department of Health never even like send out a text or an email message that says, we're doing everything we can, blah blah blah, or
yeah,
anything. There's been zero contact, and
yeah,
that's very sad.
it is. This whole thing is frustrating. Do you think so? I think something good that's going to come out of this is people are going to have been so worn down with COVID and all the challenges, and their spirits are so kind of broken that something as simple as cannabis legalization isn't going to seem like such a hot topic anymore. They're going to be like, yeah, whatever, legalize weed. I've just worn a mask for 6 months. People are dying around me, like whatever.
Right. That's a
So
good point. Yeah, people be too tired to fight against it.
yeah, I think there's gonna be some apathy. But so did you use cannabis before you became a patient ever?
Yes, years ago
Okay.
I did. And I hadn't used it in like more than a decade when I became a patient. And that was one of my things. Like, it was from a time that was really, really hard in my life and really, really bad. And I had so many negative associations to it. And
Hmm.
I'm like, I don't, if that's gonna, like, if I've smoked joints before, I know what it is. I know it's not gonna like fix me, make my pain better. So, and that was one of the things, that had really, I think, prevented me from jumping on, full board. My mom's actually the one that convinced me to become a cannabis patient. And she was like, you've tried everything else. She's like, you've tried everything. You're floating in tubs of salt water. And I was going for
Ah!
flotation of therapy. And I'm like, I was desperate. I had tried everything,
Yeah.
every supplement out there, every alternative therapy. And it's all expensive. And I was
Yeah.
blowing through money and going through it all. And she's like, why wouldn't you try this? And I'm like, it's so expensive and I don't think it's going to work. And she's like, your dad and I will pay for it. And they took me to my
Wow.
first appointment. She said, God works in mysterious ways. And I was like, that is so cliche. Like, whatever. I'm like, okay, we'll look into it. And I went. They took me the first time I went to my appointment. They took me to the dispensary, and
Yeah.
it's
That's
amazing.
awesome.
And then yeah, the day that I started, that same day, I was able to stop both opiates and Valium. And then later, like, within 6 months or so, come off of everything else. So it was really,
Wow.
really impactful. And for me, immediately impactful.
Wow. So you got
Yeah.
your mom to buy your weed.
Yes.
That's
And
pretty
I never
awesome.
expected that.
Yeah, dude,
I don't
like
think they did either.
it's a crazy journey. It
Yeah.
really is. Like, so when you're consulting with other mothers, and I imagine you consult with all kinds of patients, what do you end up recommending the most? Is it oh, and also, let me ask you this. So you're an RN or a nurse practitioner?
RN.
So they
RN.
put into the new bill that
Nurse practitioners
can
can.
can prescribe.
Makes sense.
Have you thought about doing that?
I have a lot. I don't know if it makes sense to, I don't know. I've gone back and forth about that, but I've always thought about going back to get my NP as well.
Yeah.
So maybe that could be in the future. But yes, so because I'm not an NP and because I'm not a doctor, I can't recommend anything.
Hmm.
So, but I encourage patients to really explore, like, it really depends on the condition. Like there's such a variety of, of different, ailments that people can utilize cannabis to help address the symptoms. So it really depends. Generally, I encourage new patients to start with a dry herb vaporizer and just start, just to try it out, because, one of the biggest causes of patients not to continue with cannabis treatment is anxiety and panic attacks,
Mm.
especially with edibles. And it's less of an issue here in New Jersey because we don't have access to edibles. But if you when you talk to patients in other states, they'll go to the store and they'll buy something from the dispensary. The people won't tell them. We have better counseling in New Jersey than a lot of other areas. And
Hmm.
they'll buy, a 100 milligram cookie, and they'll go home and eat the cookie, and they
Yeah.
don't know that they should be starting with like 2.5 milligrams to 5 milligrams, like
Yep.
super low. Or then you get the people that don't know how long it takes for edibles to kick in, and like to eat something like, well, I didn't feel anything, so I ate more, and then I ate more, and then it's like an hour later, all of a
Yep.
sudden they've overconsumed. So
Yeah.
I always encourage people to start low, then increase low. That's the mantra in the industry.
Yeah.
But I prefer dry herb vaping, and I like dry herb vaping because of the immediate effects, and also because it wears off more quickly. And then, as patients start becoming more comfortable with the feelings of, inhaling cannabis, then we slowly start, exploring edibles very slowly. But also CBD. CBD is so important. That's not
Yeah.
highlighted much in our program here in New Jersey. There's,
Yeah.
every place has a CBD strain. Um, but I actually get my CBD from hemp. I use hemp-based CBD because it's so expensive here in New Jersey, and there's a
Yes.
limit.
Yeah.
So I get all of my CBD from hemp, and then I, usually, depending on where they are, New Jersey-based patients, I usually encourage them to look at that as well. But we usually come up with like a plan, a program, and then tracking is very, very important too. Keeping track of how much they're consuming and when, and for newer patients, it's really that those first few weeks to months where they have to learn how to self-evaluate.
Yeah.
It's such a difficult concept for patients to grasp, and for practitioners as well. Usually somebody's sick. Oh, I look in the book. Oh, you need 30 milligrams of
Yeah.
this. Take these 2 pills. You're going to be fine. That's it. You take those 2 pills. Cannabis doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And it's very individualized, and a lot of people get frustrated with that. But one of the things you have to be able to do is to self-reflect and to self-evaluate. So I encourage people to write down your feelings. Like if you're feeling pain, write it down, scale of 0 to 10. If you're feeling anxiety, 0 to 10, what it is before you consume.
Yeah.
And then write down what you're consuming, and then reevaluate afterwards, depending on whether you've done inhalation or,
So
ate edibles.
the one thing I do think is great with edibles is, as far as consistency goes, you could always have that time where you're like, oh, I didn't realize how warm it was, and you get a really big hit, or it's like drying out and then like you repack it. It's like there's a lot of variables with smoking. If we actually had a tried and tested program here where you knew you were getting 2.5 milligrams every single time, then we actually could dose patients more accurately. And I think we get a little closer to that when we start talking about cartridges. Where do you feel like is that part of the journey? Like we start with dry herb and then it's like carts or edibles, or?
Not necessarily. Some people are just good with dry herbs. Some people go to edibles. Some people go to carts. Um, with carts, I'm a little bit resistant. They're not my favorite method. I'm always worried about additives. I'm also worried about the actual oil in inhalation via the methods that we have now, because if you look at the actual cartridge, sometimes you can suck, and depending on the cartridge, you can actually get globs of the cannabis oil come through, like that hasn't
Huh.
been vaporized. And it can be a defective cartridge, or maybe not even necessarily a defective cartridge. So there's something called, there's a specific type of pneumonia that you can develop if you inhale, because it's an oil and if it gets into your lungs. So I'm always very cautious with that.
Yeah.
I have my reservations with that. I also have my reservations with the higher doses. Some people need really, really high doses, but I encourage people to start lower. And then if you need those higher doses, then you go to them. But for somebody who needs to smoke like several joints, obviously a concentrate's going to be much better for them. For
Yeah.
somebody who only needs, a few hits of a low dose THC product, the cartridges tend to be much more concentrated than they need. As far as edibles, I agree with you. Like the consistency would be amazing if we had access to like knowing. But, one of the things I've run into clinically is not everybody's metabolic rates are necessarily the same. So some people can have like a different experience. You can have, take a certain dosage today. Tomorrow, it might not necessarily work the same. And it could be an absorption issue. It could be a metabolism issue. And then, another challenge of edibles in general is not everybody can actually absorb oral cannabinoids. Some people, and it's usually people who have a history of a digestive disorder. Like some people, they have zero effects. There's no effects whatsoever.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Don't hear that very often.
No, I would say in my estimation, it's like 10 to 15% of patients. And I deal with a very high acuity. The people that I'm talking to aren't just casual users. They tend to be, Crohn's patients and ulcerative colitis patients. So I do have a lot of digestive disorders in the population that I'm interacting with. But yeah, it tends to be, people who've had gallbladder issues or the gallbladder removed. And it's most likely an absorption issue. And, a lot of times some patients might have difficulty absorbing fats. And it could very likely be related to that because we know that, our cannabinoids are absorbed via lipids.
So when someone does like a sublingual, I always figure like that's partially the absorption on site, but it's also you're swallowing it too. So like, would they be able to do that or would it still be just an inefficient method?
It would still be inefficient. So sublinguals are amazing. Yes. Sublingual, traditionally, classically, a sublingual, it's all absorbed under your tongue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're using a product that's made with like extracted with alcohol or a vegetable glycerin product, that's possible. It can be absorbed under your tongue. But a lot of people are taking oil under their tongue and it's not all going to be absorbed. It's just, it doesn't absorb oils well in our mucous membranes. They just don't. And so they do end up swallowing them and processing them more as an edible. But yeah, so somebody who can't absorb it in their mucosal tract, in their digestive tract, yeah, that's not going to be the best method. They would just want to see that they had a true sublingual.
See, this is like a problem I'm having with, especially with CBD oil. They're calling everything a tincture and they're oil. So it literally means alcohol based, correct?
Yeah. I don't know. I think there is zero accepted nomenclature in the industry, and it's really, really frustrating. My ideas of a tincture, I think when they're saying that they're using alcohol to extract something like a FECO, like a fully extracted cannabis oil, and then they're using that to infuse the oil, that's maybe, some people do call oils tinctures. It's technically not, like from what I've learned, but again, I don't think there's really an official Bible of what they consider to be in cannabis. And even things like full spectrum, like it's very, very challenging. A lot, and we talk about this. I'm part of the American Cannabis Nurses Association, which is an amazing it's amazing professional organization of nurses around the country who are specializing in cannabis therapeutics. And even there, we were talking about how frustrating it is not to have this nomenclature. Like you'll see a lot of times like full spectrum on the bottle and there's zero taste and zero color. So we consider full spectrum to be everything in the plant, like not just the cannabinoids, but also the terpenes and the flavonoids, everything in there. And so when you get this bottle, it's like, that's not, but there's no regulation. There's no, there's no authority on labeling in cannabis and
I think that is so difficult because you want the regulation so people are getting the best product and they know what they're getting. But the people who are regulating it often don't know what that answer is. So they end up putting crazy restrictions that actually cripple the program instead of making it more efficient.
Right, right.
So
Or they put silly restrictions that mean nothing.
yeah, like when the FDA wanted to make it so you couldn't ingest CBD in any way. Like I was like, that's no.
It's ludicrous.
Yeah, or when they banned vape carts in Massachusetts because of the black market issue, so often you get people regulating and it hurts it, but you're like, yes, I want regulation, I want patients and people to get good quality tested products, but please, like, bring in an actual cannabis consultant and do this the right way.
Yeah, that's so important. The cannabis consultant, that's the biggest. I think a lot of people just come into the industry and they're like, oh, I think I'll Google this and I'll do this and I'll white label my stuff and I'll put it out there, and they have no idea like any of the details, and this whole issue of testing, we're always looking, especially in hemp, we're always looking for companies that are testing, that are fully testing everything. And you'll see now everybody has it on their bottles, third-party testing, but a lot of it's kind of a sham. The only thing they're third-party testing is the cannabinoid profile. So it's good. You do get the cannabinoids that you think you're buying. It does get you to go on what they say on the label, but they aren't testing for pesticides or heavy metals or mycotoxins or, all of these other things. That's really expensive. That's a full panel test. So now everybody's like, oh, I'm making sure my brand is testing. But it's like, what are you testing for? So, and it's a shame because now consumers have to dig in deeper. Like, you have to really look at all of those tests. You need to get the COA and check everything, not just the cannabinoid profile.
But like you said, it's really expensive. So unless now are we putting this in the hands of big business instead of the small people who are kind of, starting their natural CBD lines, and they are taking all the precautions and they're buying from reputable distributors. So maybe the product they're getting when it was in a giant vat was tested, but now when it's the end of the line, well, they're like, well, I know this is the COA for my ingredient. I'm just going to do the cannabinoid profile so I make sure I'm dosing correctly. But if the end consumer is like, oh, I want the full test, then you're putting this in the hands of big business kind of too.
No, the only people that I know that are really doing the full test are really like those more smaller ones that are making sure, because the bigger business, a lot of them are the ones that are skimping, unfortunately.
Really? Mm-hmm. Well, that's good.
Yeah, I don't know of many. I only know one place that's doing a full panel right now, and it's a smaller Vermont-based company.
Oh, that's awesome, actually. Then,
yeah, it's kudos. But you're right. It is challenging, and that makes it even harder because you're competing in an industry where you are competing against these big box people, and it's not standard to test for everything, which again is one of the challenges that we're facing as a quality. That a lot of clinicians are very, very concerned with.
Is this the type of thing they do in, say, like, alcohol? Like, is my bottle of wine or vodka tested for heavy metals and contaminants and all that?
I have no idea.
I'm very curious about that because I do know probably not, right? Like, I do feel, at least when we get to an adult use market, like always the restrictions they put on cannabis are so much higher than any other industry. But I'm just like, this is you want to put out a good product, but if someone's just like eating a edible on a Friday night at a party, like the extra cost that's built in, are we going to be able to get around that? The extra regulation is ever going to be like, I don't know, how tested is a 6-pack of Budweiser?
Well, how tested is any of our food? No, there's no testing. I mean, I guess it depends what you're getting. Like when you purchase food or purchase alcohol, it's not something that you have to, with food, you have to put it in your body, but generally it's, with alcohol specifically, you don't have to have it. It's, and you can choose organic if you want to choose organic. Yeah. With, if we're talking about a medicine as, or what people are, then it really should be organic. And if it's something that people have to put into their bodies at high doses, especially when you talk about like patients that are using like a gram of FECO a day, that's a majorly high dose. That's a lot of concentrated pesticides and toxins and stuff that they could be putting into their body. And I think the bigger challenge is the misconception of the labeling, that people think they're buying things that are fully tested. They think this has been checked for pesticides. They think that, these safeguards that they're putting on it mean something, and it doesn't, unfortunately. So I think that's more of the challenge when you look at it. As far as regulation, I mean, I'm talking about hemp, and there's no requirements. There is no regulation. People can do whatever they want. And unfortunately, that's resulted in a lot of really bad products on the market. There's a lot of great products. There's tons of good products. And there's a whole bunch of crap out there that nobody should be consuming. And it's horrific. But, that's one of the challenges. As far as cannabis specifically, it varies a lot, like from where state to state of what they have to test. And in Colorado, there's really very little requirements as far as, they don't have to be organic. There is pesticides in a lot of the products. And
really?
Yeah. I think New Jersey is the only place that requires no pesticides, but even our testing here in New Jersey is kind of a sham. It's all tested, but
well, the amount of time it takes by the time you get there, and they just take like one little clipping of a plant.
And that's another issue facing all testing everywhere, hemp and cannabis. Like you're testing one little piece of a plant. Plants vary a great deal from, even within the same crop. But no, in New Jersey, they're testing everything at the Department of Agriculture labs, and they don't even have the equipment that they need there to fully test to where they should be testing, as far as making sure there's no pesticides and residuals left in our products. But there's no third-party labs in New Jersey. That's still illegal.
No, and that's another thing. I know so many people waiting on the sidelines who are just waiting to open them. We have such an industry. It's heartbreaking the amount of people at this point who have lost properties they had, who have just lost tons of money waiting for this.
I know. It's a killer. And then you weed out the smaller people and the people who are really like have it in their hearts and put everything into it, and you weed them out, and it's only the big corporations that are standing in the end.
Yeah,
and that kind of seems set up that way here in New Jersey. It's a shame.
Yep, it does. So what can we see you coming up in? Because we can't leave the house. So I would normally say, like, where are you speaking? Where are you going to be? But
nowhere. I'll be in my living room next few weeks. So you can go to marijuanamommy.com and check out my site. I always put up there what I'm doing. I have new videos coming out all the time. And new pieces. I don't really think I have much on my schedule right now coming up.
Okay, cool. Have you, I've been doing you're always welcome to join. I've been doing a weekly hempy hour.
No, I know.
Definitely come by.
Every week I'm like, I'm going to go. And then it's like, you know what it is? I go for an evening walk, and it's like always at like the tail end. I'm like, I got to run home. And then I'm like, oh, it's too late.
Yeah, it's fun though. It's really keeping me and like a lot of other people still kind of connected with our little Canna fam and all that. But and we did that one brunch I thought was really cute too.
That was really fun with Proud Mary. That was fantastic. Yes, I love that.
I felt super guilty because I won Kim's prize in trivia, and I was like, that's not a fair fight. I can't play in trivia. like encyclopedia.
Should have just given you the prize.
I know. I tried to give it to the side, but you know what? It was actually kind of cool because I got to try more of Kim's products. So
awesome. I love her. I love her products. Yeah, she's fantastic.
So, well, thank you so much for coming on. And
my pleasure.
Yeah. You want to give out your social and all that stuff too?
It's Marijuana Mommy. So
everywhere.
You can search,
okay.
Let's see, marijuana_mommy at Twitter, on Twitter. And I should have written this down. Let's see, Jessie Gill .marijuanamommy on Instagram, and you can search Marijuana Mommy on Facebook.
And that's Pretty Pipe Shop and everything is all there. And
Pretty Pipe Shop is all separate. Yes. Yeah, that's up too.
And if they want your consulting and all that.
Yes, but unfortunately, I can't sell anybody any products right now because we have nothing to sell.
Okay, well, they could bookmark things for the future.
Yes.
For when life starts up again.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Jessie, thank you so much for coming on. This was really fun.
Thank you, Tara.
All right, have a good one. Stay safe.
I'll see you soon, hopefully.
All right, bye.
So close, yet so far away.
I know. All right, bye. Thanks.
Bye.